What I call depth is in reality a juxtaposition of points, making it comparable to breadth. I am simply badly placed to see it. I should see it if I were in the position of a spectator looking on from the side, who can take it in at a glance. This flexibility between one point of view and another, this thinking oneself into a position rather than being there, describes for me an active part of a pictorial practice, even though I know Merleau-Ponty lays out this description in order to discount it. Our understanding of depth and breadth is inevitably aligned to point of view. The dimensions formulate themselves in response to which way one is facing. Like left can become right depending on which way you turn, so breadth can become depth according to an observer's position. When used to describe an object rather than a space, depth and breadth become dependent on an overriding sense of front. Like a piece of furniture designed to be set against a wall, we can understand a fixed measurement of depth and breadth, whatever position we are in. With a painting, we are presented with a surface that faces us. And Michael Fried has argued for issues of facing over issues of flatness, an acknowledgement of painting's status as a thing to be looked at. Depth and breadth's reliance on front and facing mean they participate in pictorial space and in painting in a very particular way, contributing to the complicated alignment of real space and representation. The actuality of breadth countering the depictive order of depth. The actuality of depth through the margin of thickness, countering the spatial expansiveness of breadth. John Wilkins considers his work as composites, formed of two paintings, one over the top of the other. The doubling avoiding the hierarchy of figure and ground. Both parts of the composite negotiate volume on their own terms, and Wilkins is careful to use the word volume in preference to depth. So the expansive liquidity of green is oblivious to, while also accommodating the linear shorthand for light and shadow. There is a resistance to totality, but also a demand that the thing hangs together, a definite confrontation sitting firmly and strangely within the convention of facing. Merleau-Ponty's alter ego and key adversary as he takes issue with depth as breadth is George Berkeley. His descriptions of a depth and breadth equivalence are paraphrased readings of Towards a New Theory of Vision. For Berkeley, depth is invisible. Neither distance nor things placed at a distance are themselves truly perceived by sight. The argument goes that we cannot perceive depth, or to be more exact, we cannot properly understand what we perceive because depth does not expose space, distance, relationships, but rather it compresses, foreshortens, overlaps, obscures. Breadth, however, is considered more explicit. It lays out relationships between things. It is the extent of something from side to side, a lateral spreading that explains distance and interval. Breadth has a quality of openness that can suggest that everything is visible all at once. In Jane Harris's paintings, the directness of a work surface mark the elusiveness of picture making. Materiality, sheen, and brushmark attract and hold at bay. A bounce back of light and shadow that makes image uncatchable and prompts a move sideways. The flip and shift activated is often doubled, a matching between a pair of forms, the centrality of each offset by the other. This lack of a fixed position is seconded by the preoccupation with the ellipse, a form that can be understood as a two-dimensional shape, facing us flatly, or can be read as falling short of a circle, a shape moving into or out of sight. The inscribed edge marks precisely a point of uncertainty between form and void, between advancing and receding, but also the falling into of a downwards depth rather than a depth ahead of us. In order to describe the compression of depth, Berkeley offers an external visual structure, a diaphanous plane, that we are to imagine erected near the eye and perpendicular to the horizon, a version of vision that is exterior to the body. I'm not interested in how useful Berkeley's theories are in actually describing looking, but I am interested in how Berkeley's description of depth suggests the fabricated nature of picture making. Berkeley's fictional plane frames depth. It limits the focus of contemplation in the manner of a picture, and it presumes an attentive observer. But it is not the window analogy often posited as a model for depictive space. Rather, onto an abstract projection space, elements in depth are made to surface. Berkeley observes how a straight line rises, that recession provokes elevation. His theoretical version of depth offers a moving upwards rather than a moving inwards. This process is escalated in painting, for in order to make depth visible pictorially, there is a necessity to climb vertically. And in order to make accessible that which recedes, there is also a tilting forwards, a tipping towards the front, a generous expansion in order to see the thing to be looked at. Pictorial depth's reliance on the vertical signals, for me, an instability. The pragmatic necessity to go upwards creates a point of rotation, because as you expand the distance between things, the equivalence to breadth is compelling. The depiction of depth on a flat surface, if it expects to be seen, has a move to breadth built in. In Beth Harlan's Front and Cut Scatter series, retraction and dispersal seem like the consequence of the pictorial activation of frame and edge, a pulling inwards and a spreading outwards, that involves a surfacing of material information laid out and laid down. The scattered attention they demand diffuses an expectation of wholeness. The earlier tilted table compositions of lucid and zone picture this laying out, a lifting up to be looked at, that sees the rear ground looming, accommodating depicted recession through vertical climb, inwards describing upwards and establishing an acrossways reading of surface. David Joslet observes a moving sideways as he tracks the various ways depth is displaced in modernist painting. He calls this lateral extension. And he quotes Clement Greenberg describing the increase in scale in abstract expressionist painting as a compensation for a loss of illusionistic depth. The flattening surfaces of their canvases compel them to move along the picture plane laterally. I think it is more useful to think about this shift as a move to breadth, as a change in the mode of address, rather than as a move to flatness. Breadth can be considered as a diagram of depth, and sideways space should not be presumed as non-space. For Rosalind Krauss, a historically contemporary position has been proposed between the horizontal and the vertical, between the floor as a site of production and the verticality of a wall-bound presentation. Her text Horizontality continues our preoccupation with orientation and with oppositional terms, and specifically demonstrates how the implications of one axis can act within the logics of another, the horizontal vector understood as a force constantly active within the vertical field. Paul Virilio talks about a need to change our bearings from the near and far of perspectival geometry, and to instead consider a reverse vertigo of high and low, a secret perspective above our heads. He argues for a vision that is dependent on gravity and the risk of our falling upwards, that rebuts the Renaissance model of vanishing lines converging on the horizon. Hubert Damisch's counter to the certainty of perspective comes in the form of cloud, a collide moving in all directions at once. The technologizing of vision that Virilio also focuses on, the square horizon of the screen, does seem to evoke Berkeley's diaphanous plane, dropped in front of our eyes, but now not because of an objectivity or clarity provided, but because it brings everything together on a vertical surface, escalating a confused equivalence between near and far, inside and outside. When depth and breadth participate in the contentiousness of distinctions, they engage with some of the repeated standoffs in painting history. Standoffs between flatness and illusion, depth and surface, verticality and horizontality, absorption and theatricality, the theoretical and the experiential. The exchangeability between terms that Merleau-Ponty offers without meaning to challenges for me what had appeared to be at stake in painting. It presents furious oppositions as the same thing, seen from a different point of view. For Jacques Derrida, there is no potential for a settled coexistence of opposing terms. Inevitably, one of the two terms governs the other or has the upper hand. Depth and breadth posited in opposition are made to depend on each other and define each other, and so overthrow each other endlessly. At any given art historical moment, one can suppose that one orientation, either depth or breadth, has more weight than the other, that one is deemed more appropriate, even though both terms are always in play, and that their oppositional weighting prompts rotation, the movement and then the pause and then the movement again of a holding apparatus, an apparatus that responds to a need to negotiate between depth and breadth without settling.